Hi everyone. So I'm talking a little bit about the psychological and stressful impacts of a keto, carnivore, low-carb diet, and inspired by Danny Roddy's video about why the carnivore diet is stressful, I wanted to jump in and add a little bit about how the psychology of eating really plays into what is going on with the body when we are in that hypervigilant, stressed out state. So start from the beginning. The carnivore and a low-carb diet are stressful for many different reasons, but they are also very valuable tools. When a system is under so much auto-intoxication from being poisoned from the inside out, it is such a valuable tool for lowering that endotoxin really quickly, because when you take out so many of these irritating foods and fibers, whether it's really fermentable fibers and things like nuts and seeds and citric acid and all of the preservatives in our food, things like carrageenan, things that are in our supplements. When you take all of those out, it allows the gut to really lower its inflammation pretty quickly. And I experienced firsthand what happens when you do that. I went from being bedridden to all of a sudden within 2 days of switching to a carnivore diet, feeling like I was getting my life back. And I was shocked at that turnaround. So I love the carnivore diet for that reason. And just, lowering the irritation in the gut can allow those junctions to start to tighten again. When they talk about leaky gut, they're talking about the junctions opening up and letting food particles through into the bloodstream, and then the immune system starts to attack, and then later down the line, you start to attack your own cells, leading to autoimmunity and all sorts of disorders. So when it comes to stress, Danny Roddy talked really beautifully about how metabolic stress, anything that's interfering with sugar and oxygen use, is read as a stressor on the body. And the carnivore diet is a perfect example of this, because when we take carbs out of the picture, that's suppressing thyroid function. Why is thyroid function important? Thyroid function dictates so many processes in terms of digestion rhythms and energy production and libido and, temperature and pulse. And when glucose is no longer part of the picture, thyroid conversion is going to downregulate, because so much of the thyroid conversion happens in our liver in the presence of glucose. When we take that out, that critical process is not happening in the same way that it hopefully would. So also in the carnivore community, a lot of carnivore advocates normalize the having bowel movements one every 3 days or so. And again, that is not ideal, because if you look at the system from the standpoint of systemic health, having that kind of buildup in the colon is not conducive for things working properly. When things sit and ferment and putrefy, that is so much food for the bacteria within us to feed, and we absorb their byproducts or their endotoxin. We literally do poison from the inside out, even if we have removed all of these irritating foods. So a lot of times people on the carnivore diet, what I saw in myself, we see high levels of cholesterol. And again, this is the body's wisdom stepping in. When the body's under significant stress, cholesterol will come in to sort of make sure we have the stress hormones to meet the demands. And there is evidence even showing that cholesterol can bind to endotoxin, which is, that's very helpful for us. But in addition to high cholesterol, we see people feeling cold all the time. So we see lower pulses, and then with that we see prolactin levels rising, we see TSH levels rising, glucagon, growth hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. And especially with women, this is very interesting, that oftentimes on a low carb or ketogenic or carnivore diet, eventually they develop hypothalamic amenorrhea or lose their period. And in those states, we see a few things happening. We see estrogen starting to rise because of the lack of period, and also we see iron levels starting to really accumulate in the tissue. And this, again, is another stressor. When iron starts to rise unopposed, that is fuel for pathogens. They love iron. It is high levels of iron can even activate certain viruses. So not ideal in the long term. And especially thinking about the classic carnivore diet where it's really favors lots of red meat, maybe water, maybe some broth and salt, and that's about it. It is also pretty likely to be deficient in calcium unless someone is, supplementing. But even again, there's problems there with these supplements have so many additives and preservatives that we might even be reacting to the silica or the silicon dioxide or the stearic acid that's in this calcium supplement. So I hear so many people say, I was feeling great on carnivore, I was feeling great on keto, until I wasn't. And most people start talking about cravings that come up, and they just reach a certain point where they say, ooh, I just needed some chocolate cake, or I just needed something sweet. But we have tricked ourselves into thinking that maybe the only way to heal would be to stick to a carnivore or low-carb diet, and ignore what our body is telling us to keep going down this path that we think is going to lead us towards healing. So again, thinking about stress and all of the experts that talk about how physiological stress looks the same no matter what causes it, whether it's imagined, it's stressful thought, something in our environment, something we're eating, something we're doing, something we're absorbing, something we're breathing in. When we look at the cellular terrain that shifts, the chemicals are the same no matter what. So I think it's also really important to acknowledge what happens when we are on these diets in terms of the psychological component. So feeling like you have to eat this way, that there's no other option, that is stressful. That is sending signals to the body that there is a deficiency, that there's a scarcity. It's telling your body that you can't trust it, that whatever cravings it's having are not to be trusted. And that constriction, these thoughts, that impacts the functioning of the colon in the same way that being in a hypothyroid state impacts the colon. Same thing with that stressed, high serotonin contraction state. The colon isn't going to be having those rhythmic contractions that we need in order to have bowel movements, that we need to move endotoxin and move matter out of us so that we can continue to regenerate. I also want to go back to a point about calcium on the carnivore diet, and oftentimes it is very low in calcium, and we forget that health requires a balance of minerals. The cells require a balance of minerals, and there's a wonderful quote from Ray Peat talking about how the mitochondria can bind a certain amount of calcium during stress, but accumulating calcium can reach a point at which it inactivates the mitochondria, forcing cells to increase their inefficient glycolytic energy production, producing an excess of lactic acid. And to add to that, these stressful states sort of compound each other. Excess lactic acid can lead to an increased production of serotonin, of estrogen, all the while burdening the liver as it's so struggling to detoxify these stress-based hormones, which again is adding to the overall burden on the body. And to think about what can happen too when we are on these carnivore-based diets and say we are fasting, this can trigger the release of free fatty acids. And if our diet has been predominantly polyunsaturated fats for the majority of our life, that is going to free up the circulation of these fatty acids to the point where they're actually poisoning our other cells, blocking respiration and shifting to a state of gluconeogenesis, which again is less efficient. It's producing less CO2, less ATP, and that's where people start to feel brain fog, fatigue, hormonal imbalances kick in at this point. And again, especially for women, if the hormonal imbalances start to take hold and we lose our cycle, that iron accumulation is going to be particularly dangerous for us because of the way iron can lead to viral activation and, just leading to all of the hallmarks of early aging when we are in a state of estrogen excess. So, back to the psychological aspects of being on these diets. any kind of restriction or feeling like this is the only way to heal, something is wrong with me, or even just the fear of eating other foods because when we've introduced them in the past, it hasn't worked out so well. That is holding the body, holding the colon, holding the nervous system in this contracted state where things aren't safe, that you can't trust your body, you can't listen to these signals. And I'm making this video to hopefully remind people that if they've been eating a certain way and it's no longer working, that it might be time to really step back and think about what their goals are as a human and what their goals are for the foods they eat and how they want to feel, and also bringing it back to physiology in general and learning about how using glucose as a functional tool to really give your cells a leg up and give your cells the opportunity to create energy so that you too can feel energy. And I remember finishing a really long hike, and it was in the high 90s that day, and I was in my carnivore period, and getting home and eating a pile of beef just felt so intuitively wrong, but I just went with it because that was what I was eating at the time, and I felt like I had no other options because my body had what felt like lost the ability to process carbs or any kind of fibers. And, I felt really cornered and really stuck. And again, my call to action here is to let you know and to give you the opportunity to think that there might be another way of healing. And, if you're not feeling fully satisfied on carnivore and you're still having symptoms and maybe you've lost your period and you're starting to feel cold and just unwell, it might be time to make a change. And I would love to be able to talk to you more about this and give you some tools to really take your power back and to remind your body that it's safe, that you can trust your body, that you can start adding foods back in and work with your cellular terrain and really find a way of eating that is there to reduce stress, that is there to signal that you are safe, that you can stay in that rest and digest kind of a parasympathetic state where everything works better. And when everything works better, you can see more potential in the world, you can do more, you can act from a place of strength and energy and creativity and optimism. And I always talk about the shortness of life and how crucial it is to really take matters into our own hands, especially when it comes to healing. And if something isn't working, it might be a great time to just slow down and see what we can start to add back in, what we can start to change, and go from there. Thanks for listening, guys.